Well, I can't,
I think you said it already.
Well, I think we can address that.
I mean, you did.
you can address their
I think that-
illiteracy.
No, but I think what you can do is you can structure the exit ticket to, just for example, on that number 2, if you had just put the numbers 1, 2, and 3 out next to it, would that have gotten you 3 responses maybe?
Probably.
Okay.
So, one is gonna just.
So I'm just saying that
How
because they
can we
didn't
word
read
that,
it.
structuring or reading, what do you wanna, how do you want?
Scaffolding,
No, I don't wanna say that, me personally.
The way, I would just say.
I want to scaffold
The
everything.
structure of the structure of the question.
There it is, construction of the question.
Okay, so construction of the question?
Yeah,
That's the first
that's
one?
the first one, yeah.
And Davis, I think you already said the other one was, you know, using strategies to help them with the word problems like that.
So the conceptual versus,
Right.
okay. So how do we wanna word that? Number 2.
Using conceptual strategies to break down word problems.
Yeah, cause you can tell there's
It sounds great. I
there's
don't
a
know what that means, but
conceptual
sure.
breakdown, cause they're not understanding like, okay, how to go to 8, you know, how to go from 8 to 1 to 40 to whatever, 40 to 5.
So, put that.
well, see, for me, you know, an exit ticket is that's your benchmark that you're walking out of that class with.
Mm-hmm.
Who got it, who didn't. If 80% of the class didn't get it, then that means that I did, as a teacher, this is something this is a reteach moment for me, this is a reevaluate how it was presented, figure out what worked well, what didn't work well, and make a decision, do I need to devote whole nother lesson to this? Is this something that maybe I can cover in a mini lesson or in warm-ups? So it's kind of that diagnosis. So once you get to the exit ticket, now it's the matter of doing the evaluation.
Right.
How could you make that question better? I don't think looking at the questions they address and they follow the protocol of what we see from any other assessment. So I wouldn't wanna change the question to make it easier, because then when they get to the star or what anything else, they're gonna fail, because they're not used to that concept. So, I guess the question would be, as the content was presented, did it match to the question? So, the formatting of the question.
So that's, to me, addresses number 1.
Right,
Construction, does it align to your instruction?
Right,
Was it clear?
right.
Sorry, I'm saying a lot of things. Was it clear of what was the expectation of that question?
Right.
And then there was something else you said, I forget.
Roll back the tape.
Throw the red flag in, or
Yeah,
replay
I know.
flag.
That made me think, I also realized that they, even the ones who understood that you're supposed to multiply, or, we did another lesson, and they can't multiply. So that might also be a factor in why they didn't get this. So maybe what I can do is, I plan on doing going back to the basics and getting their foundation stronger. Like, cause
Yeah,
I
we
feel
need
like a big, other than, them not reading, like, even the ones who read it and that I knew, understood the question, didn't understand how to get the answer to the question because they didn't realize how the numbers were related. Like, they couldn't
So
figure
that's-
out why 8 and 40, like, what was the correlation between those two numbers? So then maybe I need to just go back and do like a foundation building.
It's not even really fun, that is the concept. That's just understanding the concept of this to that. So that, number 2, what she just said is really concept based, not really foundation, because that will be embedded in it. Okay, so did they even know to multiply? That's the concept. Do you know to look at this and know that this to this means I'm multiplying to get to this? And then the problem later is, could they even multiply?
Yeah.
So, but did they even know to multiply first?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Well,
Yeah.
yes, they knew to
Good
multiply,
job.
but they multiplied the wrong thing. Most of them multiplied.
So
My
concept,
my
yeah.
2 biggest ones was they either added 40 and 8 or they multiplied 40 and 8.
Yeah.
So what they were supposed to do was divide 40 by 8, and then take that number and then apply it to the
So-
1 to get 5.
So that's concept. That's concept. They don't even know which ones to multiply and divide. Now, if they knew that and still got it wrong because they couldn't multiply, then that's foundation.
Okay.
That's the difference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna jump in here. I'm gonna offer two pushes.
Okay.
Cause you guys are talking about the right things, just pushing on the solution. One, construction of the question, I think to your point, we don't know what questions they're gonna see. So like, I don't think the question is the problem. I think it goes back to, do the kids understand what the question's asking them? And how do I help kids kind of break down, cause like you said, either they missed a part of the question or they missed a word out of the question, so what's that reading skill? So how can I help kids break down? Like whatever the question's being asked of me, am I including all parts? Am I answering all parts of the question? And am I understanding at the end that they want me to find the total, right? Cause that little word in there. So like, how do we help kids do that so that it's not just like building the questions, it's like, here's the question, what do you need to do to break this question down so that you get all parts of it? And then I think the second piece, sure you could multiply on this, but when I approached this question, like I was like, I can draw a picture, right? And that can create my ratio. So it's almost like, how do I help kids come up with a plan to help solve their problem? And so maybe it's like, I see these two numbers, if first ratio doesn't jump out to me, then like, oh, maybe I can draw a picture and like, cause here's 8 cans to 1 can. And it's gonna take a lot longer, but a kid can have access to that, and that's kind of where their conceptual comes in. So like, what is the plan that I need to do in order to get this answer, right? So some kids are gonna go right to ratio, some kids are gonna try multiplication, some kids may be like, I actually need to visualize this problem, like that's a good mathematical tool. And so how can I like draw this picture out or use manipulatives or whatever to kind of get to that answer? Or set up the problem to where I understand it. And like get kids to start to like talk to each other about that. Actually, when I read this problem, I saw like these 8 cans, so I drew them. You have a good example, I think you pulled up an example of a kid where they drew it. Show that, explain what you did, explain that thought process. Oh, and then the kid who says, oh, I drew a ratio because this is what it reminded me of, the other kid's like, oh, okay, now that makes sense to me, right? So sorry, I just jumped in, but like, you guys are
That's the
hitting on the
problem,
exact
getting them
right
to do
root
it.
causes.
Yeah.
Just
Like
like,
getting them to do it. Like
Instead
not
of
me,
now let's
but
go
you,
into
like,
the-
you.
What are we gonna do to address this? Like,
Yeah.
So now we know the issues, we know the struggles, we know the strategies. Now what are we gonna do to address this? So what Jonathan said, so at least for was that number 2? How are we gonna address it?
So is that okay? How can we help them plan, or you want something else?
Show and tell.
A show, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Show and tell.
identify the
Show and
scholar
tell.
Yeah.
who met the exemplar and then have them explain. Sometimes scholars get it more from their peers and understand from their peers than they do from us because we become Charlie Brown's teacher after a while. So, you know, they'll hear it from their buddy versus us sometimes.
Well, and I think that for math, that's one of the things that we do. We have to hit all of those senses. Are they a visual? Are they an auditory learner? How do they learn? So you, as part of your demonstration, you're showing, you draw, here's a box with 8 cans in it, and here's 1 can of carrots. Here's another box with 8 cans in it, you know, kind of things. And from your exemplar, you showed that in your exemplar because you showed that it was 8 and 8, 8, 8, 8, 8. So you're kind of showing that picture but not picture kind of thing. So I think that showing that demonstration to make sure you're hitting all of those types of learning that trigger for those kids is one of the things that you can get those aha moments.
Right.
well, and as they plan, if they are going back to the problem, right? This is how I'm planning back to the problem. It helps get to this first piece of like, is the kid unpacking the whole problem? Their visualization and or their planning is gonna tell you whether or not they do. So it's like, okay, right? What in this problem makes you think that? What in the problem made you take this next step? And that'll help kind of do both of the unpacking of the problem at the same time as they're planning out to solve it.
Alright, are you good on number 2? Or what, how are you gonna address the misconception for number 2? Okay, so when are we gonna address the misconception for number 2? I don't know when you get this lesson, I know this is gonna be bad. Cause did you give me this before the break? Did you give me some of these
to you yesterday.
Okay, good, perfect, that's even better, cause I was worried that these were the ones that we were supposed to do last Tuesday. So since this is
Yes, I
new,
did those out.
okay. So since this is new, what are your next steps? When are you gonna address this? How are you gonna address it? When? We already talked about how, when.
I could address it next week. We can, do a, for our due now, I could pass these out and then we could do like a show and tell so that it gets them to like think about what they had just done, as well as giving them like that feedback before we get, to the next part, because I didn't wanna push into the next part until they understood this concept better. So then I'm going into like a little mini reteach specifically in, like the next part is equivalent ratios, and so, I kinda wanna tie in like this concept of how to get to the fact that you need that this is an equivalent ratio from the question. So I'll probably do this as a do now, and then have us sit and discuss this question and how to figure it out, draw a picture, and be like, oh, by the way, and kind of segue it into equivalent ratios, if they pick it up.
Something I would suggest is just take for each of those questions, take a scholar that gave you an exemplar and have them come. I like the way you did number one, when you come up and saw number one up on the board for me, show me, and they'll go up there and just silently write, and just say, well, wait a minute, why did you put an 8 there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how did you know it was an 8? You know, kind of thing. Play devil's advocate on the question, and that way it's the students talking in their words as opposed to your words that
Mhm.
might trigger something else with somebody else. Just,
So I get to chime in now. So one of the things I've noticed trending on our campus, when it comes to that particular thing, the show and tell, the think aloud from the student perspective, we could extend to have so much more of that. A lot of times kids get stuck and y'all will switch up on your way of explaining, but the kids still aren't following you. And I think sometimes I'm not sure if you're concerned that, well, what if I put a kid up there that doesn't do all the steps correctly? But that's not the most important part. The most important part is that they see a scholar taking the risk of solving a problem and they can help walk each other through it. Sometimes you can address the misconception a lot better when they're in that framework than when you're the one explaining it. So I want y'all to take the risk and let the kids go. Even if they're wrong, they will call each other out on being wrong and receive it a lot better than when you guys are the one that's up walking them through it.
Just a suggestion that I have too, had a teacher do this once and really loved it, and I've always thought about doing it, is they put their exemplar on the board and everybody had their paper graded back and everything. And it said, okay, I want you to compare mine to yours. What's the difference? What could you have done to come to my conclusion, right? And have them write it out on the side. And then say, okay, pass your paper to the person to the left. Now I want you to look at theirs. Same concept. And then you can have a open discussion with what are the misconceptions or what did you miss and what's different between mine and yours. And get them to see it that way maybe.
This also helps with like the sophistication of strategies, right? Like if a kid is drawing out and then there's another kid who's higher level that has the ratio, it's just like, okay, compare these two, right? What's the difference? Right, which one was faster, which one was easier to do, okay, try this on the next problem. It helps gets kids who maybe are not there, the more sophisticated, to kind of see the difference, have access, but like, oh, if I do it this way, because whatever, I heard the thought process, I can try and take that risk on the next time to do it the other way.
Alright, so this concludes us because they gotta get to the kiddos, on this end, but thank you all for everything.